Okay. You're ready to start?
Oh, that's where the good stuff is.
Original.
Maybe Hugh with this.
I'll deliver them out to you.
Okay, 'cause I got a salad for me.
I got some. Sour cream and onion, regular, barbecue.
Barbecue.
Ooh, those are popular. Ron? I'll pass. Okay, there we go. I can bring the cookies around later.
Okay.
Yeah, over here by David and I.
Nothing against Wescom, but maybe after they're posted.
Yeah.
In the middle.
All right, well, good morning. Welcome to the Tuesday, May 11, 2021 Urbandale City Council meeting. I'll ask Nicole to take the roll call, please.
Carberry Montgomery.
Here.
Caduce.
Here.
Obrecht.
Here.
Hoagie.
Here.
Russell.
Here.
Excellent, thank you.
All right, and ask for a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Move to approve. Motion by Obrecht, second by Pogie. Discussion, roll call.
Obrecht.
Yes.
Hoagie.
Yes.
Carberry Montgomery.
Yes.
Russell.
Yes.
Caduce.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So then item 3 on our regular agenda, first is item 3.1, a Wescom 28E update. AJ, I'll turn it over to you to start us off.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. This afternoon, noon hour, we're having an overview presented by the representatives of Wescom. And they're looking at the revisions of their 28E agreement that we're currently engaged with. As the Wescom operations have evolved over the last many years, we have brought in, as an organization, 2 subscribers, the city of Norwalk and the city of Waukee, that have been very successful ventures for our operation. And also we're looking at the addition of the city of Windsor Heights. As you can imagine, logistically, it makes a lot of sense as you look at the western suburban locations surrounding Wescom and our communication system. So representatives are here today to review those with you, give you a little bit of brief history, and to answer questions. This will, if you don't have any questions or additions, we'll have this on a June agenda for your formal adoption and approval. So with that, I'll turn it over to representatives.
Great. Thank you very much for inviting us and sharing your time with us. I'm Darren Riney. I'm the Chief of Wescom Emergency Communications. And as you can see, we currently serve the 5 cities that are listed, looking to add another one. I know things have changed a lot over the past year or so with everything that's COVID related and ongoing in the world right now. Some of the things that, before I get in and hand it off to Matt, with the operational COVID-related incidents we saw a huge decrease, obviously, in the amount of calls that came through Wescom, and that's simply because people weren't out and about. The first 4 months of 2020 compared to 2021, we've seen a huge difference as our numbers are actually starting to go back up. We're returning to normal call volume, and even along with that, we're seeing more involvement with the agencies where especially the police departments are becoming more active simply because people are back out and about. In comparison, in the first 4 months of 2020, we saw about 18,500 911 calls. Currently, we're just under 19,100. So a difference of about 600 911 calls. But in actuality, because of all the officers and the department's involvement, we're actually seeing close to a difference of about 6,000 calls versus the only 600 911 calls that we've seen. The radio traffic is another indicator of how much people are actually out and about. Last year, within the first 4 months, we saw about 2,200 hours of actual radio talk time, and this year we're just under 4,500 hours. So we've more than doubled the radio traffic that's occurring currently, which ties exactly into people are getting back out and being in the public again. With that, we do have a few slides we're going to share with you, and I've covered a little bit of these. We are the 911 answering service and dispatch system for the 5 cities that were listed. As was alluded to, Windsor Heights requested to join our service, obviously paying their share just like everyone else does and everything. We do police, fire, EMS. We do emergency medical dispatch where we actually provide potentially CPR instructions over the phone, things like that before the ambulances, fire trucks, everybody actually gets on scene. The agencies that we serve, West Des Moines is kind of unique as their fire and EMS is still separated. It's two separate departments. It currently does have one chief, but that's why they have the extra EMS logo down there at the very bottom. All the other departments are police and fire, obviously. The area that we serve with the 5 cities. And then recently, last year, actually, we went through the first ever strategic plan for Wescom Emergency Communications. We focus on governance, service levels. With under the governance, it was reestablishing and redefining what we are as an agency, setting up a new model for how we are overseen, where we're actually getting more of an executive leadership where the cities will actually have representation on our board versus the operational side of it, where that's going to still continue to be the police chiefs and fire chiefs that help us how to better do what we do and meet their expectations. So the Oversight Executive Board, benefits to membership, what that requires to become a member, the legal structure for Wescom, obviously through the 28E, the growth strategies. We want to grow, but we don't want to get too big. We want to make sure that we have enough staff to handle the businesses that we do. We want to ensure that we are providing the service expectations. That's going to be the big thing, is that we don't want to get so big that we lose the services and the levels, not only that we expect to provide, but that are expected by our agencies that we work with. And then the last one is the service expectations, where I kind of alluded to that. The benefits of being a member of Wescom, actually laying out ahead of time the strategic plan as far as technology, so nobody's caught off guard that, hey, in 5 years, we're gonna need this type of system upgrade, and we can plan ahead for that. And then obviously the standards of performance. With that, we're going through a couple of different accreditation levels at the national level. One of them will start in July for CLIA, which will benefit all the police departments. And we've already started, and it's APCO Project 33, which is through the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials, APCO, much easier to say. That is actually certification of our training that we provide, and that will really behoove the fire departments, because that's part of their accreditation process is that if our training is certified, that actually helps them. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt, who's going to get into the kind of government political side of this thing.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Oh, I went a little too fast there.
Welcome,
Matt
Matt.
McQuillan, I'm the city manager for the city of Clive, but I also serve as the chair of the management committee for Wescom. And thanks to Chief Riney for providing the overview. I know we talked with you all last year about the strategic plan and your support for that, which very much appreciated. So what we're talking to you about today is actually implementation now. We're getting to the point of the legal changes or the structural changes, really I kind of consider it as the evolution of Wescom in terms of its growth and the need for the governance structures to reflect that growth. And so the 2080 update, this will actually be the 5th restated 2080 agreement for Wescom that we've done. I think Mayor Andeweg has probably been there for all of them, as well as my mayor. So it's come a long way, and really we're getting to a point now where we have an additional community that wants to get added, so it'd be the 6th community. With a request from Windsor Heights to join. And really from an operational standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. You know, they're currently served by Polk County Dispatch and kind of on an island a little bit with other Polk County dispatched agencies, where Johnston's really the closest to them. So they're surrounded by Des Moines on the east side and the rest of us and the Wescom network on the west side. And so that was part of this, but it wasn't the main reason why we wanted to do the 2080 update. So what we're looking at is a new management committee structure with the city managers serving as that management committee and an operational subcommittee that is the chiefs. Today, the management committee is made up of all the police and fire chiefs and myself. And so we're starting to get into quite a substantial operation with Wescom, and there's really some long-term strategic decisions from a finance and a facility standpoint that we felt was appropriate. I end up talking to all the city managers about these things anyway, and that we really wanted to formalize kind of the ad hoc process that we're using with some of these major decisions. Also, we needed to give a path to ownership. So some of the new contract users that we currently have under the system, Waukee and Norwalk, wanted to know, okay, what's our path to being owners like Urbandale, Clive, and West Des Moines? So in this 2080 agreement, we're laying out a path where basically a credit is given for, a 25% credit is given for every dollar of operations that a community contributes. So what theoretically, not theoretically, what's actually going to happen over time is in about a 6-7 year time period, it allows for kind of an investment in Wescom to the point where we feel comfortable with ownership. Because there were certain assets like the radio system and even the facility improvements that were expenses outside of the normal operating budget that the 3 original owner cities actually bonded for and invested in. So we need, what I feel is a happy balance of recognizing the owners, the original owners of the system, but also giving a path to the new communities. And so also with a new member coming in like Windsor Heights, there's a provisional time period. So they would be a provisional member for 3 years where they would have no vote on the board, but they would be paying, they would be obviously an ex officio member of the board. But after that 3-year waiting period, then they would have a vote. And then there is also maybe an additional few years for them to get to a path of a full authority member. There isn't a ton of difference between the full authority member and the partial authority member, as you see on the screen here. The main difference is that full authority member has rights to the assets of Wescom, where they both have votes, and then you can kind of see the credit. And so what will happen with this new update to the 2080, Norwalk has some assets that were done when they created their tower site that we utilize in Wescom down in Norwalk. They're going to transition those assets, the ownership of those assets over to Wescom. They get a credit for that. That essentially moves Norwalk to a full authority member. They've been a member of Wescom for about 7 years. Waukee is about at a 5-year time frame. When they get to about that 7th year with that 25% credit, they will be a full authority member. And then Windsor Heights would follow a similar path. It's probably a 6-7 year time frame. So we felt that both, again, recognized the ownership, but also gave a path for the new authority members to be truly vested in the system. And that's what we ultimately want for all the communities that want to join Wescom. And this would be with Windsor Heights addition, the coverage area. Growth in the future, is there options and opportunities? Sure, but Wescom isn't looking to grow just to grow. We want to make sure it makes sense for the system and the operations. And also, we've got now potentially 6-member communities that are all growing, or for the most part are growing themselves. And so just keeping up with that population growth is an important thing for us. So moving forward, some key projects. We're doing some rehosting of the network. Those are some things that we wanted to change from a technology perspective, as the chief alluded to. Another task of one of the other strategic planning committees, this was the governance committee that took on this project of the updating the 2080. We have other subcommittees that are working on various elements of the strategic plan, and one of that is setting that service expectation. Chief had talked about the accreditations to complement both your police department, Clive's police department, West Des Moines, that are all CLIA accredited as well, and other communities that are seeking similar paths. And then ultimately recommending the approval of Windsor Heights joining Wescom. And so that is going for formal consideration before them on Monday. So they are first in the queue of the formal vote. And what that is, and just to give you a little bit of the mechanics, so all of the member communities are being asked to vote on and approve the updated 2080 agreement. There's an additional action that both Windsor Heights and West Des Moines as the operating agency of Wescom will be doing, and that is a memorandum of understanding that lays out the terms by which Windsor Heights joins Wescom. And a couple of the aspects to it is they're being asked to pay 2 years up front, non-refundable for their operating costs. They've got costs that they need to incur for their technology to kind of get up to the Wescom standard, some reprogramming of radios, things like that they need to do. That's outlined in the memorandum of understanding between, again, West Des Moines as the operating agency and Windsor Heights. So they will be doing an additional approval action beyond the 2080. And then the city of Norwalk has another action related to that transfer of assets that I talked about earlier. So that's really the path forward. And this will ultimately be the populations that Wescom will be serving. If you add those numbers together, we are definitely getting up there, well over 150, nearing 200,000 in population served. So, and as these communities, Urbandale, Clive, West Des Moines, Waukee, Norwalk, and Windsor Heights grow, this number will continue to grow. And then would be the cities that would be served by the system, and then the agencies, just adding on to the slide from earlier. So with that, those are kind of the outline, and we have a path forward if, pending your support and questions that you have, bringing it before you for formal adoption in June. And that's actually all the cities are going to kind of be queued up that way. Windsor Heights is first, and then at the very beginning of the month, it'd be Norwalk, West Des Moines, Clive, you all, and I think Waukee is last, just with how I'll be attending a lot of council meetings in the month of June. We'll just say that. We've got it all queued up with the 2080 itself to go into effect July 1. And then the go-live date for Windsor Heights to be on the system by September 1. So we didn't really want to do that in the middle of the summer. It's a bad time to transition a community between dispatch facilities because usually the call volumes are the highest in the summer. So we're kind of planning that, and also gives them some time to get some technology elements worked out, but that we would bring them over on September 1st, and then they would be contributing, just like any community, there's a component to this that we're going to work out on the budget side of having some kind of credit go back to the existing communities for Windsor Heights upfront payment, but that's something we're working out on the management committee side. So, because we want to recognize that there has to be, a financial benefit while we're adding members. It's not just to add them. So that's kind of a quick overview. Any questions that I can answer for you regarding what we're looking at here? Expanding this, very successful regional partnership that we've had between our communities for many years now.
Matt, you said in addition to the cities, there's also agencies that belong to Wescom as well?
Essentially, it's the police and fire agencies of those cities.
Okay.
So we like to recognize the badges for each of the agencies. So every city has police and fire department. The one exception is West Des Moines has that EMS, fire and EMS separated. So they actually have 3 different agencies that are served by Wescom. So it's all the member cities' agencies. And we do also provide some support on the radio side for the school districts. There's a arrangement both with West Des Moines and Urbandale on that, and we're actually having some conversations with some of the other cities. Some of the other school districts, some of the challenges is they invested in a different radio system, so we're trying to work that out a little bit. But that also helps with the seamless communications for anything that we need to do with the school districts.
In the strategic plan, it talked about independent basically revenue sources. How far down the line is that kind of pegged out at?
I would say it's pretty far down the line. We laid out a 5-year plan. We know that we currently, in the current legislative environment that Wescom operates in, there isn't legislative authority for that kind of independent agency, so it would require a legislative fix. I think in the strategic planning conversations, and this is the same thing that West Des Moines has been seeking too, in a long-term path of how does it become more of an independent agency and not necessarily relying upon one community, because the city of West Des Moines is the operating agency. And that's going to be a long conversation, not something that's going to happen tomorrow, but I think there's a desire amongst all the communities of this has been a very successful venture. How does it continue? It stands on its own today financially, but there is a desire from all the communities of let's be really clear with what that independence looks like. And there'll be some work. We'll need a legislative solution for some of that as well, because it doesn't exist today. And we may find through all that research that maybe it isn't worth all of the legal changes to do that. And the 2080 setup just continues to evolve and continue to be the vehicle. That also might be the ultimate solution too. So we don't necessarily have a preconceived notion of what that looks like. I think we're pretty happy, at least when I hear from the communities, we're pretty happy with the funding model that we have set up, based on population. That has been pretty solid. So I definitely think it was more on the tail end of the strategic plan conversation.
Matt, as Wescom continues to grow, does that provide an easier path for interoperability for the non-Wescom jurisdictions that we work with? Or I mean, how do we work with the interoperability as, I guess, part of that with Des Moines and Polk County and the other non-Wescom agencies?
There's definitely a number of, obviously when somebody joins the Wescom system, that's like the ultimate interoperability. But I would say that there's things that are already working in that respect outside of, it doesn't matter which PSAP that they're associated with. Des Moines, for example, here recently switched over to the same radio system, the state radio system that actually Wescom was the original foundation for. So we're actually on the same radio system and it's pretty seamless. We don't have that situation with Polk County, but Polk County radios still have the ability to change a channel and hear the Wescom channels. So there is definitely interoperability things that are continuing to happen. Is it as perfectly seamless as everybody on the same radio, same CAD system, same records management system, and the same dispatch center? We're not to that level yet. But I think there's, at the same time as we were working on our and actually finishing up our strategic plan, the 911, Polk County 911 Service Board was working on theirs, and they actually just recently adopted it. And they're very focused on what are these joint projects that we can identify. One that's been the biggest discussion has been a common CAD or a CAD computer-aided dispatch system. So if you have Johnston on the Polk County side and Urbandale on the Wescom side, can we make it pretty seamless for both Polk County dispatchers and Wescom dispatchers to see everybody's units in the CAD system for deployment? Because we do a lot of that today. There's automatic aid and things like that happen. Can we make that even more seamless? So there's definitely interoperability there, but it always could be better.
But by the same token, if you have different systems too, you do have some redundancy naturally built in too, right? I mean,
Yeah, there's an element to that for sure. And with some experiences on a technology side that we've had in the past, that was, beneficial to us where we were able to utilize some of our partners on some of that and in those kind of situations. So yeah, there's kind of an argument made on both sides. If you get fully interoperable and maybe you get to one dispatch center for the whole county, which I personally don't think is realistic, but I don't think we also want that. I think this county, this metro area is big enough where you likely want two facilities for that redundancy and safety.
Matt, when new communities come to Wescom, do they typically seek out Wescom to join, or does Wescom throw it out to those communities to join? What's kind of the process for that?
We don't recruit, so they come to us. And in this case, it just started to make a lot more from an operational sense. We, for example, in Clive, there's times where Windsor Heights Fire and EMS will join us on a call. We'll back them up on a law enforcement call if there's, an officer that needs the support. And so it just seemed to make more sense to make that seamless. That's how all the Wescom communities operate. We back each other up when things occur. And it just seemed a little bit different and have that delay that Windsor Heights would have, because the Polk County dispatcher, there's a little bit of delay if they're trying to contact Wescom. So for the most part, we don't recruit. Communities come to us, and then we see if it makes sense in our operations. I'll give you kind of a weird example. We had a county that's an hour east of here called the chief about, hey, can you provide dispatch service? Well, don't think that would quite work. It doesn't make operational sense for us. So we've probably turned people down more than we've accepted. And because of the success of the system, our name is definitely out there, and we're the second largest PSAP in the state, behind Des Moines.
Great. Oh, thank you. I appreciate the insight.
Any other
questions?
comments? I just want to say it truly has been a success, I think, Wescom through the years and the iterations that we've gone through. And I do remember the original Wescom and the three cities together, and I see Bob Brownell is on our line here today, and he was mayor of Clive when the first Wescom came about. But truly, I remember a lot of discussion at the time about, the turf wars and should we be giving up our dispatch systems individually and doing this, and it was truly the right decision. The three original cities truly overcame a huge capital cost that we would have had to incur and came together and did this, and it's truly shown to be a great success through the years. So kudos to everybody that's made it that way. So thank you.
We appreciate your support. Again, there'll be formal action brought back to you all in June, and you'll see us again. You'll see kind of the document that really lays out everything we included here in the presentation. But we look forward to providing regular updates on the progress. You'll see the chief or myself annually at least to provide an update on what's going on, and we appreciate your investment in the system.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
All right.
Chief, thanks. Thank you very much. All right, then moving on to item 3.2 is the MSA Stormwater Report. AJ?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, for the next two items, I'm turning this over to John Larson, our Director of Engineering and Public Works. These are particularly the stormwater report. You may recall that a previous lunch and learn that we had, it might have even been post-pandemic, pre-pandemic, pardon me. We outlined the process in which we as a city were going to pursue a study that would examine stormwater-related issues to address those concerns that were raised, particularly after the 2018 event where we had significant flooding east of 86th Street, although throughout the entire community, but that was the hardest hit portion of our community. Certainly, it brought up the deficiencies that we wanted to examine, and so we reached out through that process of developing RFPs, selected a consulting firm to assist the city, and we're prepared to begin that review process with you at this point in time. That will be followed by the traffic study, which we were engaged with over on 104th between Sutton and Meredith to Plum. I sent out information earlier to you as kind of a precursor to this discussion, so you had an opportunity to prepare any questions or to at least give some more definitive direction to staff as to how you wanted to approach those. So with that, I will turn over to John to begin that discussion and presentation on the stormwater report.
All right, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Like AJ was saying, we did hire MSA to look and analyze all the storm sewer. So what we have here is just an update for you to let you know how that's progressed and where we are in that study. From MSA, we'll have Eric Thompson and Nicole Sundgren. They'll be leading the presentation with their PowerPoint. Nicole, are we ready to share with them?
I think they should be able to share. Is that coming up on your options?
Okay, I think we can see it when you're ready to go.
Okay, thank you. My name is Eric Thompson. I am sort of the lead number crunching nerd on this project, and I'm going to go through the initial part of the presentation, and then I'm going to hand it over to Nicole, who will talk about how we've taken all of the data that myself and my team have put together in terms of this is what an ideal system would look like, and turn that into a capital improvement program so that the city can, over the course of the upcoming years, turn that into reality. There we go. So just a very, very brief agenda, and I know we're probably feeling a little squeezed for time, so I'm going to try to accelerate my portion. But we're just going to talk a little bit about the study scope, the technical approach, which is sort of my element of the project, and then I'll transfer it over, like I said, to Nicole to talk about the capital improvement planning process. So where did this all begin? It was introduced pretty well before we got on stage here. The city issued a request for proposals back in July of 2020, so right smack in the middle of probably the worst part of the pandemic. We got under contract, interestingly enough, August 11th, which means that today is 9 months after our starting point. The map that you're looking at here kind of shows the study area. It's basically the eastern 1/4 of the city. It's about 2,500 acres out of nearly 10,000 in the city. And the whole idea was to look at this storm sewer system holistically because folks, as was mentioned, had indicated some dissatisfaction with the way the storm sewer system in that portion of the city was functioning. You're going to see a blow up of this map here in the next slide, in the next several slides. And I'm going to go over just a little bit to help you kind of home in on your bearings in just a moment. So this study looked at 6 major watersheds, which were kind of identified by the creeks that they drain to. And we more or less looked at what it would take to provide a design service level equivalent to the Iowa SUDAS manual, and that's the Statewide Urban Design Specifications Manual. It kind of establishes the minimum criteria for really all civil engineering projects, throughout the state. And one of those chapters in particular is related to stormwater drainage, stormwater management, and pretty much everything that we did followed the SUDAS design standards. So what are those standards? There's a whole host of them, but the long and the short of it is we really focused on 2 things, and that was what we would call the design service level. So SUDAS says, hey, at a minimum, we should be looking at the 5-year storm for a storm sewer design, but the engineer, if there's sensitive issues at hand, could up that to the 10-year storm. And in discussing this with the city staff, it was decided that the 10-year service level would be more desirable. And, you know, in today's way of thinking, we really don't like to talk about 10-year storm or 5-year storm anymore, because there's a little bit of a sort of old school understanding that, oh, well, we had a 10-year storm last year, so we're good for 9 more years, right? Well, the 10-year storm is really best equated in terms of percent risk. So we have a 10% chance any given year of having a 10-year storm. And if it was a 5-year storm, we'd have a 20% chance risk of having a 5-year storm. So going from the 5-year to the 10-year service level provides you, you know, an extra 2 times safety factor. And to put that in yet another way, the 5-year event is about 3.8 inches over the course of 24 hours. And the way we do these designs is most of that rain is compressed into the middle 2 hours of a 24-hour event. So 3.8 inches in 24 hours is the 5-year storm, and the 10-year storm is about 4.5 inches. So these are fairly large storms when it comes to considering how quickly they're falling across the duration of that 24 hours. So criteria number 1 is, what is the drainage level of service? And again, we're looking at the 10-year service level here. And condition number 2 is to provide footing drain service to all of the existing homes in these neighborhoods to make sure that their foundation drains, their sump pumps can connect to the drainage system. And these are the criteria we're using, which are actually a little bit higher than what the SUDA standard requires, which is generally speaking 5 gallons per minute per house. We're up to about 12 gallons per minute per house on average in this part of the study. But in reality, when you talk about footing drains and sump pumps, it's just a teeny tiny drop in the bucket relative to the flows that come off of the land when we get one of these big rainstorms. So this is really sort of a minor design detail, but nonetheless, it was a significant consideration for how all the pipes were laid out to make sure that we had connection points for all the existing houses. So the scope of work that was identified in the request for proposal was to provide a priority list of improvements on the public portion of the drainage system. So that excludes private storms, private streets. And then we wanted to have a breakdown of all of those costs so that all of the costs could be consolidated in terms of an entire program budget, but then they could also be broken out into what could be done during a single construction season, what could be accommodated within an annual budget that the city may have available to do all of these different works. Then based upon, you know, the construction budget, based upon the project prioritization, city engineering will come up with the idea of what project are we going to do, say, for instance, in 2022, 2023, and so on and so forth, as the capital program lays itself out into the future. All right, so that's just a brief recap of the study scope and you know, what it is we're trying to get done here. I'm going to dive a little bit into the technical approach, and I've really got 2 sort of main points I just want to sort of convey to the council today. One is just really the vast amount of data that we crunched to evaluate this whole entire system. And then secondly, the final finding of, you know, how close is the existing system to what we would like it to be in terms of an ideal system. And that'll all wrap up here at the end. So here's that study area map that I warned you about. This is an image showing in the colored shading areas kind of the topography of the east half of the city, and these areas that are sort of more of a peach colored, they represent a little bit higher topography, and then as you fall away to the north, as you fall away to the south, we're getting into these green colors. Those are the creek valleys where all of these different pipe systems drain into. And the blue lines you see all over the place are the existing pipe systems as laid out in the city's GIS system. When we were looking at planning out the new system, the first priority was to extend the system into unsewered areas. So you see all these areas that are in between all of the existing blue lines. Those are areas where there's streets and neighborhoods that really don't have a lot of storm sewer, if any storm sewer capacity at all, and we wanted to expand the system to serve those areas. We want to make sure that we were preserving the existing outfalls. So an outfall is a point where a pipe discharges to one of these creeks, because there's a large corridor through there where a pipe was put in place already. There can be issues with permitting, putting in new outfalls. We just wanted to make sure that, hey, these trunk systems are kind of laid out already. Let's just follow those trunk systems, which leads me right into the point of following the existing alignment. And then, of course, we want to follow the land slope, and we also want to maintain the shortest pipe length. Those sort of 5 bullet points kind of represent the sort of boundary conditions that are necessary for creating the most cost-effective storm drainage system, whether it's in Urbandale or whether it's in Des Moines or whether, frankly, it's in New York City. These are just sort of general guidelines. And so as a result, the new system follows very much the same alignment as the old system. And we're going to find that the pipe sizes aren't terribly different, although there are significant changes that are sort of a result of expanding the storm sewer system throughout the city. All right, so here are the study areas that we looked at, and again, they're more or less organized by the major creeks. We got Rockland Creek, Karen Acres Creek, Millside Creek, Timberview Creek, Northview Creek, and then the Lakeview Pond area. I kind of warned you that I was going to give you your bearings here, and I got a little bit ahead of myself, but if you can see my mouse jiggling around back and forth, this is Interstate 35. Right here is Merle Hay. On the south side, we've got Hickman. And then right over here, it's a little tough to see, is 86th. And then running kind of about, a third way up from the bottom, this is Douglas. And then right here, about a third of the way from the top, that's Meredith. So you're going to see this map in some shape or form many different times. And if you can kind of in your mind mentally picture where these streets are, it should help you get your bearings when we start talking about anything that might be a little bit specific. So again, the total study area is about 2,400 acres, 2,460 to be precise, which represents just about a quarter of the entire city. So as we kind of drilled down, we started with these large subwatersheds, and we broke them into 27 minor study areas, and then each one of those was broken out into subwatersheds, which basically accommodated an intersection by intersection basis. And when those intersections ended up being substantially more than 400 feet apart, we also subdivided them again. So this study ended up being over 1,000 individual assessments of how much runoff are we getting, how is it moving through the city, how are we collecting it, and then conveying it through pipes. So it ended up becoming, more and more detailed as we drilled down further and further and further into our design assessment. How do we get to those flow numbers? Well, this is kind of an important slide. This is an image of all of the impervious area that's been constructed on this part of the city. We looked at recent aerial photographs, checked against construction plans, and actually measured and digitized all that impervious area, because impervious area is the primarily important driver in determining what flow rates are. And you might be interested to know that there's over 1,000 acres of impervious area in this nearly 2,500 acre subwatershed study, which is about 42% pavement in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a driveway, a sidewalk, or a roof. It's really a heavily, densely developed area, and so there's a lot of runoff that comes from the lands in the study area. This is the land use, which allows us to figure out what we call the connectivity of the impervious area. Does it drain over grass, or does it go to the street and then go right into the storm sewer? Those are important considerations for how much water actually makes it to a pipe, as opposed to how much is coming off of the land. And then finally, for those areas that aren't impervious or paved, we need to know what the constituency of the soil is. And anyone who's worked in their garden probably understand it's a pretty heavy soil area, pretty silty. And then in some areas in the north and west where you can see those purple blobs, it actually gets to be kind of clayey. So even when the area is not paved, the soils do tend to shed more water than you might expect in an area that has sandy soils, for instance. So here's how it all kind of broke down in terms of building these watershed models. And I always try to describe this sort of like as a giant cookie cutter. You lay out one layer of dough, which is your impervious area. You lay out another layer of dough, which is your land use, and a third layer of dough, which is your soil types. And you take this giant cookie cutter, in this case it's a watershed boundary, and you punch it out, and that gives you all of your runoff information, which you can reduce into the various coefficients that go into the models. So here's just one example of the model. This is for Karen Acres Creek Subwatershed 3. And there's nothing really to take away from this except for the fact that, wow, there's a lot of dots on the screen. So each subwatershed, each one of these 1,025 subwatersheds had 3 different elements. One which described the runoff that came from the impervious areas, one that described the runoff that came from the pervious areas, and then one that summed it all up. And then we brought all that stuff together into a proposed pipe network so we could see the flows from the upper part of the watershed, adding to the flows from the middle part, adding to the flows from the lower part. And of course, as the flows increased, the need for the pipe sizes increased. hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of calculations. This is a relatively unsatisfying slide, I'm sure, from your perspective. It's just rows and columns of numbers, but there are lots and lots and lots of rows and columns of numbers on our end of the thing. We looked at the 10-year peak flow capacity, and you see I've got a little asterisk in there. We did have some exceptions where we were looking at larger design events. In particular, there were some areas in the city where large detention ponds were made, and those detention ponds were intended to provide a 100-year service level. So we wanted to make sure that the system downstream of that was able to convey the 100-year storm and not cause that pond to have backups and stop functioning the way it was. And there were a few areas where elements of the creek were actually encased in pipe. And given that the creek itself is a major conveyance system versus the pipes, which are generally considered the minor conveyance system, in that instance, we wanted to elevate the pipe service level to the 100-year storm so that we made sure that, we weren't, again, causing backups, which would otherwise cause flooding or overland flow that was less than desirable. All of these calculations kind of boiled themselves down into creating a document like this, which if you were to, take a giant slice through the earth, and the green line here represents the surface of the earth. Well, this brown line represents a certain depth below the surface where you want to have your pipe be below. So you don't have the pipe pushing up into the pavement, pushing up into the subgrade, and it gives you a better lifespan of your street surface if the pipe is deeper. So on one hand, we've got the desire to push this pipe further down into the ground to protect our pavement, but on the other hand, we don't want it to be so deep that it gets expensive to build. And then at the end, we've got to connect down at where the creek is, and we can't go any lower than that, else our pipe will be full of water all the time whenever the creek is flowing. And so we're trying to use all of these calculations to figure out what is the minimum pipe size we can have to get the capacity we want with the minimum bury while we still make a connection to the creek where we can discharge all of this stuff. And it sounds kind of simple, but it's a lot of back and forth, looking from the upstream down as we accumulate flows, looking from downstream up as we change our our pipe profile and pipe size until we find that optimal design. So here is my last slide before I transition it over to Nicole. And there's a lot of numbers here, and to someone who doesn't work with storm sewer systems on a daily basis, it's probably fairly confusing. But what I will tell you is the existing storm sewer system serving this neighborhood is just shy of 37 total miles long. Now, that does not include the foundation drain connections. This is just the dyed-in-the-wool storm sewer pipes. Of that, about 25 miles is 18 inches and smaller in diameter. And the reason I drew that distinction right there is because an 18-inch pipe is what you might consider to be a fairly large inlet lead. So as the watershed is getting larger and the drainage network is extending, the fingers that are very much at the ends are where all the inlets are that collect all of the water. And then those inlets come together into the branches, and then those branches come together into the main trunk systems. And an 18-inch pipe is kind of the threshold where you start thinking about, well, this is no longer an inlet system and it's becoming a branch. So the 21-inch to 36-inch diameter pipes, that's sort of the main branches, and that makes up the bulk of the storm sewer system serving this part of the city. And it's not altogether surprising considering you've got all of these open channels, and flow paths don't have to be particularly long before you can discharge. So we've got pipes that are getting up to 36 in diameter, making up the bulk of the system. And then for those areas where we've got a slightly larger watershed, slightly higher flows, 36-inch diameter pipe, we've got about 2.6 miles. So the bulk of it falls very clearly in the 21 to 36-inch diameter, and then the next step is the branches. Well, when we start looking at what does this ideal proposed storm sewer system look like, well, we know we wanted to extend it to those areas that weren't served. So we're adding, on the order of 5.5 miles of additional storm pipe. And the distribution of those storm pipes changes a little bit when you look at where do we need that capacity. And I think the easiest way to kind of envision this is imagine that you're a giant and you're able to reach into the ground and grab the entire storm sewer system that you're concerned with. You just need to grab it and shove it upstream a certain distance so that the whole system moves. And what happens is all of those inlets move upstream, and those guys work just fine. But now what those inlets used to be becomes a branch system, and that's where we're sort of running out of capacity. By the time we get into the trunk systems, the larger diameter pipes, those just kind of need to be extended downstream. And actually, if we look at the capacity, we find that the upstream system is actually pretty good, assuming we can relocate it as we need to. The middle system is where we need the extra 15% or so additional capacity. But once we get past that, we need to have only an extension of the pipes because we've actually got enough capacity in most of the trunk systems the way they are. Now, obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that. You can't just pick up a system and move it. And so that's where the capital improvement planning comes from, to find out what is the relative importance of moving this piece versus leaving it in place. What is the priority of importance in terms of extending the system and getting all these pieces put together? And that's where, Nicole's part of the presentation will go. My last point, and this is just a little bit tongue-in-cheek because it's hard to go through a project like this without sort of looking back on it and kind of boiling it all down. And I got a kick out of this. I did this just yesterday as I was sort of putting the finishing touches on my part of the presentation. All of the calculations we've done ended up creating about 6,000 different files, which represented just about 13 gigabytes worth of data. So again, not necessarily important, not really germane to the whole findings that we're coming up with here. It's just sort of a satisfying number to know that after all this much time, at least in terms of computer files, we've got a pretty substantial amount of data there to show for it. All right, so that brings me to the transition point, and I'll hand it over to Nicole where we can talk a little bit more about the capital improvement planning. So Nicole, if you want me to advance the slide, just let me know, and I'll push the button.
Okay, you can. Yep, that's good. Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to be talking about the CIP portion of this project. After Eric and his team was done with the modeling, we worked with the city staff to identify the priorities and the metrics for the CIP evaluation criteria. And my job is to discuss that criteria we used to prepare the stormwater CIP. Do you want to advance to the next slide, Eric? Okay, so before we even got into that criteria, we kind of started with the cost estimating process because we kind of wanted to have an order of magnitude for all this cost for the project. And we started it based off the sub-watershed areas, which you can kind of see in that left-hand corner slide. The city had kind of talked to us about their typical annual budget, and they said it was around $2 million. So we kind of wanted to see where we were in the realms of that cost. It ended up being a rather iterative process because when we started, we were nowhere near that number. So then we started there and started breaking it up into even further into the smaller CIP projects, and we drilled it down, like Eric was kind of saying, into smaller and smaller projects. So as you can see down in the right-hand side, we worked that down and kept working with that because we just wanted to see where we were with those costs and then work with our criteria from there, just so we had a handle on what kind of costs we were dealing with. And this was all based on the watershed basis. So Eric, do you want to advance to the next slide? Okay, so one of the criteria we had talked about was potential pipe salvage. So in the upper reaches of the watersheds, there were some pipe that were particularly in the upper watersheds were around the same diameter and also on the same alignment as the existing pipe or the proposed pipe that had run through the model. And so we had identified those were potential pipes that we could reuse or salvage. Now, as Eric had kind of alluded to, that some of them were on the same alignment as our pipes and some of them were not. So when we discussed these salvage pipes, we said that they had to be within 50 feet of that existing pipe. So that's why if you kind of look at this map, it's a little quirky because, there's pieces here and there, and that's because of that. We also looked at pipes that could be used as constructed or UAC pipe. Those are pipes that were either the same size or within one pipe size of the proposed design, because obviously we don't want to be pulling out pipe that is that close to the existing design because it can be used hydraulically within that size range. And also it saves the city money. So as you can see, that's where we're working here with this criteria. Next slide. And Eric's already kind of alluded to this one as well. We have a map here on your left-hand side of the blue is the existing storm sewer network, and then what's filled in green is the areas that were underserved storm sewer areas where we didn't have existing storm sewer. So we took that and we started preparing criteria for that based on what percentage were underserved with that storm sewer, so where there wasn't that storm sewer. And we used that to come up with a ranking system that we were going to use in the CIP. And the exhibit on the right shows, with the proposed storm sewer in our model, what we were going to propose with that storm sewer. So you can see most of those areas that were not served with storm sewer in the past are now being served with storm sewer. So we're trying to take care of all those areas. Eric, do you want to hit the next slide? Okay. One of the other criteria was large diameter outlets. So one of the things we noticed that there were outlets out there that were fairly undersized. And we're not talking just slightly undersized, they were vastly undersized. So we actually broke that down into two criteria of either they were undersized either 12 to 23 inches or 24 inches plus. So as you can see, and again, I apologize for the small graphic here, but they're shaded in either the pink or that very light purple there. We use that for our criteria as well, because if it can't get to its outlet, then that's always an issue and where water is going to back up. Eric, to the next slide. One of the big criteria we had was existing pavement conditions. That the city staff was definitely concerned about this. We looked at the Iowa Pavement Management Program from Iowa State. They go through the state, used to be every 2 years, it's now every 4 years, and take pavement conditions, cracking, ride, and all that, and evaluate it for the pavement condition index. It's ranked on 1 to 100, or very poor to excellent. That is the map that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. What's in red is the very poor and blue is the excellent. So we gave that a ranking on its own of just any area that was very poor. We also, on your right, did an average ranking of each area per watershed to kind of give it, so you could see what was the average, because we didn't want to give it, so we kind of had a holistic approach for each of the watersheds. And that, again, is what is on your right-hand side. You want to go to the next slide? And I think Eric already kind of hit on this one already about the trunk lines. Those are the pipes that are 36-inch or greater and connect all your networks. So you've got your small pipes, as Eric was saying, the fingers that are at the very top end of your system and that go down to your outlets. This system that you can see on the screen, again, it's very small, had pipes that went all the way down to, I believe, 84 inches. So anything that was 36 inch or greater, we gave a higher ranking for connectivity than, you know, the small 18 inches of pipe or the footing drains, which are that light green that you can see there. Because obviously those are the ones you want to reconstruct first, because those are the ones that will get all that flow down to your outlets and out of your system. Eric, the next slide. So as an engineer, as you can see from Eric's slides way back, we do a lot of spreadsheets, but obviously that's not as conducive for people to look at all of our information. So Amber, who is also on the line here, put together this nice graphic to kind of represent this information. So as you can see here in the very top left of your screen, as we kind of talked about the pavement evaluation, we have the graphic with the very poor condition, and that's what's in the yellow. The pink was the weighted average road conditions. Down the left was the storm trunk conditions. Now that is for proposed, not existing. And then we also had one for the current city CIP projects. Now, those projects we looked at were on your current CIP for the next 5 years. Now, as we looked at those ended up being either bike trail projects or beautification projects. So we ended up actually not giving them any value or weight because those actually do not impact really your stormwater projects. But in the future, when the city goes back to reevaluate, there will be an opportunity to add a weight to those if those are indeed something you would like to weight. And then from those 4 criteria, the map on the right is what it looked like when we ranked them all together and provided a composite of those weighting systems. Now, this was the first iteration. This is not the final version of it, but you can kind of see we did an iteration of it once. We went back to city staff and talked with them, and then we provided another one. So, at least you can see, there was a thought process. We tried it again and back and forth, but then, there were spreadsheets on our end, but then we provided also graphically for other people to look at. And Eric, can you go to the next slide? Okay. So now you can see on the left-hand side is that final graphic. What you see in the gray is what has been ranked in the far-reaching projects. Those are ones that probably won't get done for many years down the line. The ones that are in the pink and the blue would be ones that are in our 2 priority groupings. Those are ones that obviously are in the areas where there is no existing storm sewer there today. And that's probably why they're up in the rankings, or for other reasons, for poor pavement or trunk lines. They were based on the rankings that we previously discussed, and those are, we had the input of the city staff. From that blue area, 6 projects will be pulled from that to be placed on your current CIP. And then after that, the remainder of the projects will be reviewed annually by the city staff to be added to the CIP as necessary. The city will have access to our GIS files where all this information is located, including pipe sizes and which pipes can be salvaged and so on and so forth. They can create projects by putting it together and modifying it in the future for limits based on any conditions. So if something, would change in, 5 years from now, they can pull a different project together. So we've kind of made it user-friendly with our final product so they can create a new project if something would change in the future. And from that, I believe that's all we have. Any questions?
How many hundreds of millions of dollars are we going to spend on this?
The good news is, as they've said, the good news out of what they've said is we're not grossly undersized. So, there's a lot of pipes you could enlarge, but really is not a big priority. Where we do have some areas, again, as they've said, that are underserved or do not have any storm sewer, we'll work through those areas. And then there's some other areas where some larger pipes would be beneficial. So again, it's a very high overall dollar, but I don't know that, again, a lot of these are gonna rise to a priority that, you may not get to. When you see, if you said, like, you've got an 18-inch pipe that runs down there and it should be a 24-inch, is it worth the cost to replace it for that small change? It's probably not. It's more when you look at someone like we did on 73rd Place where, you might be getting into the 54, 60-inch pipes where you actually see a true benefit. And then I think we'll still, going forward, we'll have to kind of work with the sewer district and decide how we kind of do the, kind of the sump lines where, the biggest benefit is to get people to disconnect from the sanitary sewers and get it into your storm sewer. Right now, there's not a mandate to do that from the WRA, but I would say sometime in the future, that'll come. When they get to plant capacity, they're gonna start pushing the other communities to get that rainwater out of the system. So we're gonna be challenged by the fact we need to have a collection system for them to connect to first. So if the sewer district had tried kind of a program where they would help pay for part of the sump pump connection, we did the 73rd place. Unfortunately, didn't have any takers on that. Nobody was experiencing problems, so they said, yeah, it's not worth this additional cost, even if this district is paying the majority of it. So we might have to go more to a harder enforcement and maybe force people to connect. But again, that's kind of a policy we'll have to continue to work with the Urbandale Sanitary Sewer District on.
So more bluntly, what is the total cost?
I guess I have that handy, Nicole.
We had a total cost for the whole system if we did a total replacement, and we are revising that cost to pull out the ones that are within that one pipe size that we'd identified. So we're finalizing that cost before we send it back to you. So we don't want to give you that cost, without that tweak in that cost.
But our initial number was how much? Was it 112?
112 if you did a complete replacement on everything in the system. But again, you have many pipes that are within that one pipe size on that diameter, or, the salvage for your footing drains. So there's a lot that you could be, initially be saving on those. So we'll give you the full cost and the savings costs, and give you both of those numbers.
Again, I think that's where we're looking to try to do that biggest bang for the buck, where I was saying, that's a very high number, but again, if you're not going to get much benefit by just barely upsizing the pipe, it's maybe a misrepresentation of what kind of shape our system is in.
I remember a CIP meeting that I think John Hollobrands and Dave McKay had a $100 million number in mind. So their back of the napkin math came out really close.
So then breaking it down per project, the 73rd place project, I think my recollection was it was about a $2.5 million project. John, do you remember?
Yeah, I think it was 2.5 to 3, and then it took the 3 years. So that's what we were kind of looking at, that $1 million to $2 million. Once we kind of come up with a project, then decide, okay, do you put a couple of those together, and is it going to be a 2-year, a 3-year project? I think one of the big things is we're still kind of looking at, does the pavement need to come out, or can we maybe do this without removing the pavement? It seems like if you have to remove the pavement, it's best if we have a street that's in rough shape. That way you seem to get buy-in from the neighbors, because unfortunately, the way it works with everybody's driveways, usually you could do anywhere from 1 month to a month and a half that the people have to walk home, and if their road's in decent shape, they're not going to see the benefit. But like on 72nd, that went fairly well because unfortunately the road was in bad shape, but they understood what we were doing, and we did some storm sewer improvements at that time. Yeah. So I think a lot of it is, again, we're still just trying to fine tune. We know our areas. We're just trying to fine tune and kind of work on that package so that when it comes to the CIP, we can start proposing the next few years and then grouping those projects accordingly.
I guess one of my follow-up questions too is, what's the downstream effect of some of this? I mean, it seems like we're now pushing more water out our system, but somebody else is taking that. And that somebody's probably sitting in this room.
and that is true, but also keep in mind that water goes somewhere. So if it's not in the pipe, it's usually going over land and getting to that creek channel anyway. And what we've done on like the 73rd place project is we just focus a lot more on the dissipation on what we do at that outlet, because it's the same thing as we don't want to start having more erosion in our creeks. So we've done some additional dissipation to slow it down, and then we've used some ripreps, different things to help control that flow as well.
Well, and obviously to Adam's point too, upstream, what affects us too. I mean, I just want to make sure we are looking at this holistically, that we're not just taking a snapshot. I know we have to handle Urbandale, but as we've always said, water doesn't start or stop at our borders. So as long as we're looking at what's occurring upstream, and we're dealing with that, and also with the effects of what we're doing downstream too. So
correct. Yep, we do look at that, because again, that's that part of breaking it by watershed. We're not necessarily looking at our city boundary. It's where does the watershed go and how much of that water is coming towards us. So yes, we are looking at that.
One thing I would say that I think is important is that if we're going to do a sewer, a storm sewer remake in a neighborhood, we're going to have the sump pumps connected. And I don't know if we enforce it or not, but to have to think that on 73rd, we're going to have to go back sometime and redo those.
Well, actually, we won't have to do anything. The service is to them. So all we have to do is tell them, now it's on you to, get it from your house to the right pipe. There may have to be some incentives or things, but at least I'd say the tough part is that there is a pipe to their each and every lot that they can connect to now.
But I just think if we're going to disrupt a neighborhood, we may as well have everything connected so WRA doesn't require 2 years from now for us to go back in and do it all.
Yeah, I gotta admit, between us and the trustees, we were surprised because we were picking up with the vast majority of the cost. It was, the responses we heard is, we don't have problems now, so it's not a concern. That's why I think we might have to use more of the stick than the carrot to try to get them to connect.
Remember the discussions before then, and we were hoping everybody buy into it because we put so much money in it. But
Yep.
if they're not gonna do that, I think we just require it, maybe still pay most of it ourselves, but.
I think there's a lot of surface discharge here, not stormwater, or not sanitary sewer, but surface discharge in this area too.
Correct. Yep.
On the sump pumps.
There are some, but as you get in a lot of these on the older homes, the footing drains do tie into the sanitary.
Any other thoughts?
So when will we see this again? Will we talk about it before you guys start the CIP, or will you guys just come? I'm speaking as a member of the CIP committee. Will that just start coming to us in November when we start meeting?
That's our
Like,
intent, is
you're
that we start adding
prioritized.
CIP pages so the CIP committee could see it. And again, there'll be that working through the system on how do we fund everything and figuring the money part out as well.
Because I guess I like, adding pages for every year for what we want to do, but I still, when we get this new lowered 112,000 or 112 million number, I guess I'd still like for us to see something
What we can do is.
before it goes to the CIP, like kind of big picture.
So what we can do is, as we wrap up the report and get our first outline, we'll get everybody a copy. You'll give you a chance to look at it. If you have separate thoughts, then we can always incorporate those before we create the CIP pages.
Right. We can find that time that meets the comfort level of the council because, again, this is a large number. And if you'll recall, the CIP process is really, staff identifies those projects, strictly from an operational or technical standpoint. This roadway is worn out. We need to get service to this area. Those are it's almost, it's a mechanical or process, if you will. The other side of the CIP process is the funding and the political side of it, is that, where are the neighborhoods that you've heard from your constituents that they have a problem that they want to have addressed? And then the parameters of the dollars that we have available. And that's generally from the two sources that we have are the tax increment financing in those districts that are still eligible for those funding source. And then the predominance, of course, is the debt service that we have, the dollars that we have on the tax debt service levy that supports the issuance of debt for those projects. And so, again, where the comfort level is on the council about how much money do you want to spend? How much debt do you want to incur? Where can you tap into that? And also recall that we have a stormwater fee. And the last review that we did is that we're right in with most of the cities in the metro at about $6
Pretty
ERU.
close in the middle, yep.
And so the highest one, and again, this is more informational for kind of on a larger scale, the city of Des Moines, after the 2018 flood issues that they had, they went to the voters, or to the constituents, pardon me, and said, we're going to raise your stormwater fee. And for that, we're going to do this whole laundry list of projects to address stormwater issues you had. Now, I'm not here today to promote an increase in the stormwater fee. I'm just saying that you have avenues as a council to explore financing projects that you believe have benefit to the city.
So I understand that, and I appreciate that, and I think that's the kind of discussion that I want to have. And I think that should happen before we go to the CIP to some degree.
I think building on what John just shared with you is when we have the report
Okay.
finalized and we have those options laid out in more of a digestible format, that you as the council, because that's typically we do in August, we come back to you and say, this is how we're planning our CIP document so we can align the projects and we can align the financial tools available for you to consider. That would probably be an appropriate time for you to have a further discussion specifically on stormwater. Is that where is your comfort level? Because again, you have options, but working within the parameters that were traditionally available to you as a council and what you followed, those are the things that I think John made reference to. We'll fit those into the CIP as we go. Your desire as a council may be significantly different. We want to know that.
It's one part financial, but it's also, in some respects, the scope of the project and how much pain do we want to inflict on a neighborhood in a certain period of time too. That, I think neighbors, I think folks will understand the short-term pain is going to be worth a long-term gain. But, and truly, when we did the 73rd Place project, I didn't think I had any complaints because the people knew that they were overall improving that situation there. So even though there was a lot of pain for that project, and we're going to have a lot more pain here, but we just need to be cognizant of how much disruption we have in people's lives too.
Right, and that's why I also think part of that is the goal is not to tackle one watershed and just go all the way through that watershed. Well, likely you'll work in one watershed maybe for a few years and then bounce to a different watershed to kind of give everybody a break from that. Because that's, like I'm saying, I talk about the street condition or like the mayor's saying with the storm improvements, people need to see why we're doing it and know there'll be a benefit. Because again, just haven't had to do it, but I can imagine, that month and a half of walking to 2 months is very painful. And and there's just really no other way to do it if you have to pull the street out in front of them because you replace their driveway. That's why we make it into small segments to try to reduce how far they have to walk. But the more segments you add, the longer everything takes as well, so.
But if we're looking at just stormwater fee, when we're talking 50-year project.
Sorry, what was
If we're talking stormwater fee, we're talking a 50-year project for only 25% of the city. So this is obviously a big chunk of dollars for us to look at in the future.
Well, I'd be happy to do a PSA as a property owner in this area about the impacts of stormwater damage and flood insurance rates and the need for these projects. We need to do this, and I understand the pain of walking to your house, but, we had tenants lose everything without a renter's insurance, and so it's a tough balancing act, but it's very needed, I think, so.
Well, we also have to remember that I think we need to do this, but this isn't going to stop the flooding. This is for a 10-year. We've had, 300-year storms in the last 5 years?
Well, yeah, and the storm that flooded them out was 10 inches in 1 hour. This is 4 inches in 24 hours.
We can't
So,
ever build a system that's going to accommodate
Well,
that.
then let's
So
just
people
throw our
need-
hands up and not do anything.
No, I think we need to do it, but people need to understand that even when it's done, they may still have water standing in their front yard. They may still have water in their basement, and don't disconnect your sump pump,
Yeah. No, it's a huge task. But we just have to do it a step at a time. That's the only way to do it.
So, yep, that's our goal is, again, we'll get more to a finalized report, share that with you, and then go on to that CIP stage.
Okay. Thank you, John. Any further comments or questions on that before we move on? All right, thanks, everyone. That was very good discussion. Thank you. All right, then we'll move on to the traffic study for the 104th Sutton Meredith Diploma. Do you want to, it's 101, can we still tackle that, you think, AJ and John?
I'll try to move through it quickly here.
Thanks, Matt.
We'd asked that you give us another 10 or 15 minutes. We had a lot of information to cover today, really good stuff, but also time consuming, so we'll go through this too.
So if I hit share, I guess we might have to unshare with them and switch over to me here. Okay. Oh, okay. That was the end of the previous slideshow that was still going. That's what was throwing me off. Okay, let me get.
Really, really small fonts.
Yes.
I have a headache now.
Eric was my, yeah, it's perfect.
I wouldn't mind if we could get that PowerPoint in like a PDF, just so it'd be a little easier, so I can see it a little bit better.
When it's finalized.
Yeah, when it's finalized, and it's done, we'll provide you that information.
Yep. Okay. All right.
John, I'm gonna move these over here for you in case you need the.
All right, in case I kind of get winded halfway through, I can have some cookies.
In case you need the blood sugar pickup.
Okay. So I just want to start with, again, yep, there won't be a lot of spreadsheets and things. There's mostly be aerials running through here. Just to start with, wanted to be able to run through kind of our project area that we're looking at. So around the outside here is the Interstate, Plum Drive across here. We've got Meredith Drive here, and then Northwest Urbandale Drive comes through diagonally. So our actual project area we're looking at here starts at Northwest Urbandale Drive, goes to Aurora, up to 104th to Meredith, continues on 104th to Sutton to 100th up to Plum. Just to simplify that, when I refer to the 100th Street project, I'm kind of referring to that whole area, even though there's 4 or 5 different street names in there, just so you know kind of collectively what I'm referring to. And then also, I want to talk a little bit about the access to the interstate. So if you want to get on the interstate to go east, there's basically 2 options. We've got the ramp for 100th Street, and then we've got the reconfigured ramp up here at the 141 interchange. So if you're looking, for instance, if you live in this area and you want to go eastbound, you know, you're going to take this route to go up to there. If you're down in, say, this area, you've got the 2 options. You can come and go through our kind of our 100th Street project area and come on the ramp, or you come up Northwest Urbandale Drive, which you do need to kind of backtrack and then come around to get up onto the interstate. And if you're coming from the west, I think you're likely coming through instead of doing the backtracking here. Your natural reaction would be to come through here and take this route up to the interstate. As far as exiting, that's very similar. We've got the ramp up here to get off the interstate, or the new configured ramp over here. So say you're coming through and you wanted to get to the soccer softball complex or over into the business area. You know, you could come off this ramp, take the project route we're looking at, brings you by the complex and into this area. Or you can come around, you get off on Northwest Terminal Drive, but then you backtrack and then get in this area. So just kind of wanted to kind of show kind of how the access works down into this area and how you use those 2 interchanges. We also, just let you know, speed limit wise, right in this area here, south of Brookview and north is 35 miles an hour. We're 25 miles an hour the rest of the way through our corridor here. And then we've had a couple traffic studies done. The first one was by Howard R. Green, and they looked at our entire project area from basically looking at future traffic volumes. How do we serve the area and what should it be? And their ultimate recommendation was they felt a 3-lane cross section would be the way to go. Then since we've had concerns about the trucks, noise and things coming in the amount of volume and speeds through this area, we've had Snyder look at it from Meredith back up to Plum. So those are the couple different studies we've been involved in. And then just for point of reference, they did some traffic counts just south of Brookview here, and then they did some traffic counts just north of Oakwood. They intended to do them all at the same time. They had some issues during one of the counting periods, so they ended up counting at 2 different times. That's why sometimes you see your numbers a little bit different. You would think counting that close together, they should always be the same, but they just happen to be during 2 different time periods. So as I was stating, where the speed limits were, just the METC lines out that typically you'd want to set your speed limits at within 5 miles per hour of what the 85th percentile speed of the traffic. And that basically just means the speed that 85% of the vehicles are going at or less, because that means they feel comfortable at those speeds. And I'm not proposing that we need to do a speed change, but based on the study, Both of our speed locations, the 85th percentile speed was 38, so that would ask or kind of point towards a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit, even though we've got the 25. And then looking at our traffic volumes, again, since we did two different counts is why you see one is 6,400 vehicles a day and the other is 6,800 vehicles a day. I think, it's safe to say we have around 6,500 vehicles on the stretch between Meredith and Plum Drive. And we want to just give you a little bit of a perspective. So if we look at Meredith Drive just east of 104th, so that'd be by the soccer softball complex on Meredith, it's about 10,000 vehicles per day. I should also note these are from the DOT counts in 2016. So then wanted to kind of look at what streets would be similar to the 6,500 that we have on 100th Street. So 70th Street between Douglas and Meredith Drive, we've got about 6,600 vehicles a day, where that's a four-lane roadway with several driveways that come out onto it. And then 72nd Street between Hickman Road and Douglas Avenue, we've got about 5,600, where, as we get north of 73rd into 72nd, that's where it's predominantly, it's a two-lane road, and we have a few driveways that do come out onto that road.
And John, note that's a 2016, so those are 5-year-old numbers, aren't they?
That's the most recent we have from the DOT. The 2020 counts are not out yet.
Yeah, so, but again, those numbers were 2016 numbers.
Correct, but it's hard to say if they've gone up, gone down, just with the, what we've got going on in the pandemic, or even with fuel prices that fluctuate throughout the year. So again, that was just something I wanted to use is just a general comparison to give you a feel for other roads that have about the same number of cars on them.
But wouldn't they be higher because of the interchange that we built?
Oh, the numbers I gave for our stuff, the 6,500, that was just counted in the last month.
Oh, okay.
Those are from the study. The three that were basically comparison ones are the 2016. So yep, that was from Snyder's study with the two locations. They just physically counted those in April.
Okay.
And from the Snyder study, they looked at the trucks, and what they did was they broke it into two categories. One they called a single unit, which is a mix of your delivery, service, or rental trucks. So that could be your UPS trucks, your U-Haul trucks, things like that. And then the combo units, which would be more of the semi trucks with their trailers. So consider it maybe your box type trucks and your bigger, more of a semi type style vehicle. And again, since these were counted at two different times, they found at one location it was roughly about 8% of the traffic, or roughly 500 of them were the delivery type trucks at 1%. And again, all these are rounded in the nearest percents. You'll see that was like 65 of the combination semi trucks. And at the other location, it was more 310 of the single units and about 85 of the combo units. So in the CIP, we do have for 2022, the reconstruction of our 100th Street project as a 3-lane roadway, which was what was recommended in the Howard R. Green study. And basically, that's looking at the route to the interstate is basically a main route that helps you get to the interstate. It provides a direct route. And as I was mentioning before, some of these other streets that were examples, they do have driveways out onto them. The access control has really been good on this, so we don't have a lot of driveways. We have a couple down by Northwest Urbandale Drive. We've got one to a business and one into the soccer softball complex. Otherwise, it's just a few street accesses. So we don't have those individual driveways coming on the street, which I think gives you more of a feel of a residential area when you have those driveways come out. And then there's the other side, though. You could also look at the area, since we do have residential adjacent to it. Is this the kind of area that we would prefer didn't have additional traffic in it that was going to the interstate? We would try to keep it to only the neighborhood traffic. And there's ways you could possibly deter that traffic. Because again, we've had concerns from the residents that, they'd like the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit strictly enforced and basically no trucks through that area. So here's just some examples from the study on what you could be done, and these are a little different than what we normally see in Urbandale. If you wanted to control your speeds and possibly make it more difficult for the trucks to come through, you could add median islands in the middle of the street that would basically force people to go around them and slow down. Or you could do the chicanes, which basically, You have bump outs on the curbs, and basically it makes you wind through the street, which slows you down as well. I know we've talked in the past about, trying to prohibit trucks. We could pass a resolution that would do that. Currently, I found that we do have 5 of those in town right now. 4 of them are just south of Meredith, just west of Merle Hay, just go a little ways past. And then the other one's just east here on the Colby Woods Drive between, Colby Woods and 83rd down to Hickman. We've also designated that as a no truck route. I think the difficult part of it is really enforcement. I think you're gonna have the issue with every time somebody sees a truck calling the police, how quickly can they get there, and is the vehicle even still there? And then do you start limiting, are we talking only the semis, or is it the delivery trucks, in which case, is it the UPS truck delivering to somewhere in the neighborhood, but now they're leaving the neighborhood and somebody calls the police saying there's a truck in the neighborhood. So just throwing out that I think enforcing that can be difficult. And then another thing that they recommended, it's possible we could install roundabouts in the corridor, potentially at even every intersection, all 3 of these through here, that would basically help you control speed, slow people down. You could design those to, really make it difficult for trucks to go through as well. Again, this could be another one, might be tough sell in the neighborhood, or, it's a possibility maybe you look at this one, which is not the main entrance to the area, that it was a roundabout. Possibly you could design that to, again, deter trucks, but there's different options that are out there. But I guess with that, this is kind of the point where when AJ said the email, to be kind of thinking about how you look at the area, kind of want to get some feedback. Do you see it as that, hey, this is an access to get you to the interstate, we just built the new 100th Street interchange? Is it something? No, we look at this as a neighborhood and do not want to encourage people through there, or is it something kind of in between that?
I guess for me, it's the Plum Drive South is what I kind of consider is that divider point of would like to see some physical barrier there. I don't think 25-mile-an-hour signs or no truck signs, people are going to be on the road before they see that. And so whether it's chicanes or, I don't know, even just, hey, it's 2 lanes, but it opens up to 3 lanes further down. I figure that's what the engineers are for. I think that's where the message to the traffic has to be at is right south of Plum Drive. To say, this is not your come off the interstate, go this way for services. We want people to go east and west at that point for services if they're coming off the interstate.
So this was before my time, before Adam's time. What was the intention of the 100th Street interchange? Was it to be able to get people to businesses on Plum Drive and north of commercial, in that commercial area?
It's to provide additional access to the commercial area, but I also think it's to provide additional access to the interstate.
Because, to me, it seems that we spent a lot of time and money on that interchange, and now we're trying to discourage people from accessing it to some degree.
I guess my comments were more directed at the truck traffic and that. I don't think residential traffic is going to be discouraged by a 2-lane road or anything that way. I think it's the truck traffic or the traffic coming off the interstate that's going to be discouraged from going south. But
I think the predominance of the anticipation of the 100th Street interchange was to open up additional commercial properties on North Park and on Plum. But also, to John's point, is that it does serve as a general access point for the interstate for the community, whether it's truck, commercial, or residential traffic. So a combination, but really the emphasis that we had from a staff perspective, and I know from the lobbying perspective, is that the interchange will benefit us from a commercial development standpoint. So that was, if you had to choose between the two, from my perspective, it was from the commercial aspect, because it did open up all of the acreage, not only on the North Park corridor, but on the Plum corridor as well.
I think whether you like it or not, by default, that's become an expressway to the interchange, on and off. John, that one slide of yours, you showed 340-some semi-trucks in 24 hours? You're talking 30 trucks or
There's only, I think it was
10 trucks an
It
hour?
was a little less. There was, if you count the box trucks, the actual semis with the trailers, it was 65 to 85 throughout the day, which is it's still a few an hour on average there.
Yeah, so they're
every
coming
day.
through. And traffic counts of 6,500 cars a day, that's something as busy as you see in our main thoroughfares throughout Urbandale. Like it or not, I believe that to me looks, it's become an expressway and everyone's using to get on that interchange. And I don't know how you could get around it. When you plan that type of an interchange and with all that development, and Plum Drive's not even developed yet. What are you gonna do when that thing is completely full of whatever? That traffic's just going to increase. And to try to reduce the traffic or restrict it or slow it down, I don't think that's realistic. I think your 6,500 a day today, it will just exponentially grow as that place begins to develop out there. You know, Adam's our developing guy, but you know, once Plum Drive and even Northwest or North Park Drive fills in, I don't know how many cars that's going to be, but with all that land developed, if you think it's busy now, what do you think it's going to look like in 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think it's more of a, you know, what year did we reconfigure 100th to cut it off at Meredith and then do the Sutton Drive to
I
104th?
believe that was around the mid-90s.
And that was long before the 100th Street interchange was finalized, obviously. So, I mean, I think probably in hindsight, if you do this again, it's just how things developed out. Maybe residential in that area along Sutton Drive, 104th is maybe not the long-term would be the thing you'd want at this point today, but we are where we are today. So I think you have to somehow marry both uses that you have through there. We have the interchange that serves the commercial aspects north of the interstate on Plum and on North Park Drive, but then you also have the transportation system where you need to get cars up there. And, you know, the way it's playing out, the way it's developed out may not be ideal, but it is what it is. So I guess in my mind, I think we need to still have an efficient transportation system on there to get access up there somehow. So, and do it the best way you can, realizing you're going through a residential area too.
Is there any buffering that we could do with landscaping or fencing or?
I guess typically, speaking on the community development side, we've always kind of discouraged the fencing in the past only because it just gives you kind of that corridor feeling. Now that not everybody's left. Got that 100th Street corridor that's got all the fences as you're going south of Hickman. That usually that's why we have the 50-foot setback, is try to keep things open. And whereas here we're narrower. I think the landscaping, I don't know that does a lot for slowing anything down. And
No, I'm not talking about slowing it down. I'm talking about buffering the noise.
I don't know that really does a lot. And I question if we're gonna have much space. What I got next is maybe the complete street stuff, and we talk trail. By the time you talk road, trail, there's not gonna be a lot of green space left on potentially one side of the street.
Yeah. I think, John, using your analogy earlier, this is probably somewhere in the middle. It's not a residential, it's probably more than a residential street, but not quite a main thoroughfare. I hope the 3 lanes, maybe you'll make it at least easier for the residents to be able to get turned, just because I can imagine there's some people that maybe try and make some left-hand turns that the middle lane will help keep the traffic flowing. I like the idea of keeping the speed limit at 25, even if it's just an effort to slow it down, whether people obey it or not. But I don't know how much, David raised a good point about once all this develops, how much more traffic will we see. I think you're going to see a lot of that traffic get dispersed before it gets to I think it's Brookview. I think you'll see a lot of that go east-west on Plum to hit those businesses. I don't know that the rest of the area is pretty well developed out, so I don't know that you'll see a ton of that traffic unless people are cutting through, but my guess is they're gonna try and get back on the interstate.
The best I can add to that is again, it's always tough to project traffic that far in advance, and the MPO did some, and our first study, they were saying, what was it, in '08, we were talking maybe a 2,000 ADT in 2012 on this stretch, maybe just under 5,000. Thing that I found kind of interesting, in 2030, they're projected we'd be about 6,000 to 6,500. Well, that's what we are now. So they're figuring by 2050, you could be pushing the 8,000. It's just a question, is it 8,000, is it 9,000, is it 10 even? But the 3-lane typically can get to your 12 to 13,000. That's why we originally did the study is, there was some talk early on that this could potentially be a 5-lane, and we're thinking that might be kind of overkill for this area. So we had the study to see, 3 lanes should take our traffic for quite some time, if not hopefully, would never need to be widened out anymore.
Yeah, we can kind of look at the complete streets, and I like the complete streets concept. My only question here would be is if it almost gives the perception you can go faster because you got more sidewalks, more bike lanes. So now all of a sudden you really do separate the auto traffic from the pedestrian traffic. Does it feel even less like a suburban road and more like a main thoroughfare and kind of encourage a little bit? I don't know. It's something just a thought that something I'll look at when we get that.
Because I'd say, just as an example, granted, we're 3 lanes, Meredith being 4 or 5 lanes, you count the left. We still, it's kind of residential in the sense that a good portion of it, you have residential on either side. And where it's similar is, as I was pointing, the access is you just have your street accesses. We really don't have driveways coming onto it. And I think that helps with your flow of traffic. And, and I think it in turn could cause your speeds to go up as well. But it's kind of got that, maybe not, a full arterial feel, but it's got the good access control, which you want, that kind of lends to that feel. So that's kind of what we were hoping. I mean, there's options, for instance, like at Meredith, we've got a pretty wide apron or approach for the trucks kind of thing. The thing is, you can narrow that down to discourage them, but then all you do a lot of times is just have tire tracks on the grass, and that just looks bad. You can see, we've done on different spots on 86th Street where we've kind of paved that apron so we didn't have to keep fixing where the trucks rutted up the corners. So sometimes, that making it difficult for the trucks works, but doesn't work kind of thing as well.
Sometimes they have their own opinion as to what they can and can't go through. And I'm worried if we put some roundabouts in, we're gonna end up with just chewed up roundabouts because they're gonna barrel through there anyway.
Yeah, I think the uninformed driver coming off the interstate's the only one we can control. I think everybody else is gonna go where they wanna go.
Yeah, but I do think, even though you can try to discourage the trucks, they all know that this is the most direct route, and that's why they go that way.
Yeah, that's why I said, I think by default, it's become an expressway already.
Yeah, and there's some of the GPS services haven't figured out the Meredith interchange yet either. So
That's the tough part is, Meredith will get you onto Meredith or get you going south. It's just that if you want to go east, these are your 2 main ones from this area. You wouldn't get down to 86th.
But it's more it'll take you up to 100th Street to come south into the area instead of getting off at Meredith if you're coming from the south, is what I'm saying. I think Apple hasn't got it figured out yet, but Google does type thing.
If I could add a comment, this is Chief Johansson. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
I just wanted to throw out, and I know the guys went way past, there are some very, very vocal residents in that area about traffic already. So just keep that in the back of your mind whenever you decide what you're going to decide, because you're going to hear about it. They don't like the additional traffic coming down that road at all. And we already struggle to enforce the speed limit. And of course, we've heard about the truck traffic quite a bit as well, which there are no restrictions right now. But just FYI, lot of vocal residents in that.
So Chief, do you think keeping it at 25 would help or hurt then?
No, I think you definitely want to keep it at 25. Anything above that, and it's going to be crazy time. It does help that the street, changes elevations and curves a little bit. That helps slow them down a little bit through there. I think your bigger concern, quite frankly, than the speed is the truck traffic. And I don't know that it's going to increase either because, like was stated earlier, it is pretty much developed out down there where they're cutting through. But it is I'm not saying that really that truck traffic should be pushed off that road, but I just don't know how you do it. And it's very, very difficult to enforce a restriction on there, but probably should be or somewhere else, maybe, potentially. Just depends on what you guys want to do with that street, obviously. Like, that's the point of this whole discussion, but the residents up there obviously would prefer it stay a residential street or as close to that as possible.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess one follow-up on the truck traffic, we don't really know where it's coming from. Is it just that they are staying on Aurora and they just keep going up that way, or if they're coming off the interstate? We know the count, we just don't know the source and destinations of them.
And I do think they're, out of ones you can see that are labeled, I think the post office is a big part of it. But again, I think there are a lot of other delivery vehicles that do come through there.
I've been on Northwest Urbandale, and there's some semis that's what their intended route is. They pull up, they turn, and they go down, heading to the interstate. So, if we're gonna ever try to prohibit trucks, I'd want to prohibit only semis. I think that's easier to enforce. And it would get the big ones off that are usually create the most noise. But, that interchange we've been fighting for that for a long time before it started construction, and so it can't be a surprise to anybody that lives up there that there's an interstate interchange close. Now, I know that doesn't keep them from calling and complaining, and I think all of us have enjoyed emails from one resident up there. I don't know. I think that's what it was when he bought it, and it's still that way.
Just to maybe sum up, are we thinking, do we maybe go back to our engineers with that study and try to come up with, is there a way to maybe try to deter or limit the full-size semis through this area, but knowing we're gonna have all the cars and your standard delivery trucks through here? Again, I'm not sure what that is. Again, the roundabout's a possibility, but again, they could also drive over that, which becomes a maintenance problem. So
I think we should at least look at the options, see what we can come up with.
My only problem is that there's going to be people getting off the interstate who've never been in Urbandale. And if you put a roundabout there, those are the people that get halfway through, panic, and hit the brakes and stop. And so,
we could maybe even try just going back and we'll maybe look at some signage that maybe, it's not really as much enforceable, but encouraging another route. Again, I don't know if that'll be successful or not, but we can look at those options as well.
I mean, Omaha seems to love more traffic control than Des Moines does, and they use the chicanes. They've also used vertical signage that, it's got a 8-foot or 9-foot top to it to prevent trucks to go through. And the other is the raised pavement. It's not so much a speed bump, but it's a raised pavement section.
Yep, the table.
Yep. So
I don't know that I'm necessarily in favor of adding any of those things if we're also trying to do the complete streets.
And
Here.
maybe can I just quick run through the complete streets and kind of let you know what I'm thinking there, and then maybe we can wrap up here, just because that may impact a little, just from the sense that quickly. So again, here's kind of the same corridor we were looking at. The Boulder pink is where we got an 8 or a 10-foot trail now, so you can see we have that around the sports complex up Northwest Urbandale Drive. And then these smaller lines are just kind of where the backyard trails or sidewalks get you over to the bigger trails. And we've got this main trail that comes up through here to Plum. So we've got a plan in the future where this blue line is to have a trail that'll connect over here to 100th Street, which takes you north over the interstate. And we've got With our maintenance project, where we recently received some STP money, we want to get a trail in on the north side of Meredith here from 86th Street over to 104th as our first phase. So in our complete streets, keep in mind that that kind of looks at everything from kind of high level on what would really be nice, and then comes down to, when it comes time to build, we got to look at what can you physically construct there. Right now, our complete streets has the separated bike lanes, the full 15 feet with the 10-foot asphalt and the 5-foot of concrete sidewalk. I'm just not sure we can fit that into this corridor. Couple things to look at or point out, like I guess I'll go up here at Meredith. Currently, we've got a pretty good retaining wall along the soccer field, and I'm not really sure why the design is such that the left turn lanes seem to be offset the opposite direction. Normally, at a minimum, you'd at least want to line them up here, so you could move the left turn lane over here, which would eliminate this lane and which give you some room for a trail there. As we get to the north, you know, I don't think we have room. If we wanted to move the left over here, you put your lane here and we're right up against the sidewalks. I don't think we can shift that part of the intersection over. The problem we've got over here is, in order to get a trail in, we're likely going to need an easement from Crystal Creek. I think we're going to do quite a bit of grading because it drops off behind the sidewalk. And I think several of those trees would have to go away, which I think would make that difficult. And then up at our north end, we've got a current easement just south of Plum that I think we've got room to where we might have to do a small retaining wall at the edge of the easement, but we could get a trail in. So ultimately, to kind of work on the connectivity, it seems to me the trail really wants to be on the east side so that we're connected to the sports complex and we're on the same side of the street as we get up to 100th Street and going over the bridge. I just think what makes the most sense to me would be just a 10-foot trail on that east side to at least do that connection through there. So I just want to include kind of what I was thinking on the complete street side and then what we're thinking on our overall street corridor.
So a 10-foot on 104th?
Correct. Yep, go from Northwest Urbandale Drive all the way up to Plum on the east side. And that should help. That would tie into the other things. Again, I just don't think we have the space to fit 15 feet in there.
I think that'd be fine with a 10-foot trail along there.
Okay. So I think we'll go back, see what we can regroup with our engineers and see what the thoughts are on, you know, still providing the traffic to the interstate and maybe what we can do to maybe deter trucks a little bit through there, the larger trucks.
We're just going to say we'll come back with some options for you for another review. We'll keep within our time frame too. We apologize. We covered a lot of stuff today.
I think, I mean, AJ and I have talked a lot about communicating with neighbors and you get what you ask for. And but I do think that it's important that we be transparent and have communication as we move through this, because we know that people have a lot of opinions, regardless of whether we support their opinions or not. I think they need to know that we're having this discussion so that they can be party to our discussions and not just be presented with it when we've made our decision.
And there are several. I've kind of been telling people we were going to do the study, and anybody that just been calling and checking, it's just our study's not done, so I can't give you any answers. I said our goal was to have a study done by the end of May, so I think that is one of the things that a lot of the neighborhood knows that we're looking at it, so that will be something we'll follow up with people on.
Find the right mechanism to get that information out. I mean, to get the information out, but also, again, now that we're in a situation where things are getting better from a pandemic standpoint, the possibility of having a gathering, an informational session, we've had those previously when we've done large projects where we've invited people in and we've said, this is what we're thinking and where is it that you live and how is it going to impact you and those type of things. This would probably be one of those that we would look at again. If we have a little bit freer environment to work within, it gives us much more options.
No, I think that's the right way to, I mean, in the perfect non-pandemic world, that's the right way to handle it.
Yep, I just think we gotta get through our next steps and seeing what other options, and then we have something more to share.
All right.
We'll be back.
Glad to be back. All right, anything else for the good of the order? Thanks for sticking around and having an extra long meeting. We plowed a lot of ground today, though. If not, ask for motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.